when you delete files from your computer or your phone, you should make sure that basically it's not just in your trash, but you should sort of remove it from there because it always goes there. Now, one person who didn't know about this was a Brown University professor who is in America on visa and has been deported from America with basically alleging that one, she has said herself that she was on a funeral of a known terrorist, Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah, a former leader of Hezbollah before he was killed by the IDF. And yeah, today we'll go through some of it. There is big controversy going around this, with Trump sort of ramping up the deportations of many people. We've covered Mahmoud Khalil. We're going to cover the Brown University professor now. There's been a few more people he has been, and I think in some ways the way this is being done is a bit problematic. So today we're going to be talking about all that, and yeah, this should be an interesting episode. Welcome to the reality show. Joining me today are Jonathan Honig and Anders Ingemarsson. Welcome, guys, and I'll start with you, Anders. I don't think you were on the show before. Sort of Mahmoud Khalil was one of the first people sort of being deported. But what do you make of this specific scenario? So again, just to put on the story, she was returning back to America. She was sort of stopped by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and yeah, there was a case for deportation. So one thing to mention is this deportation was stopped by one of the judges. She was deported in spite of that, which I think is also something that is making this case a bit more problematic, with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection saying that the injunction sort of came in, basically came in after she was already deported, after the plane already left. I think we'll cover the legal aspects at some later episodes. I think right now I want to talk more about the sort of moral aspects of what this is. So, Anders, any thoughts so far?
Yeah, I mean, all these cases, whether it's this Professors Brown or Khalil, as you've discussed previously, or Central American gangs being deported, I mean, it's interesting and it's complex. You know, that's the intersection here between foreign policy, immigration policy, and free speech, as we know. From my point of view, I think the most concerning part of this, and as you mentioned, problematic, is the fact that due process is not followed. That the Trump administration is taking things in their own hands, and blatantly, basically disobeying these injunctions from different judges, whether you agree with the injunctions or not. But you know, we have a process that is supposed to be followed, and it could very well be that in the end of that process, that what Trump is trying to do is being approved by the courts. In which case it's fine. But I think the way this is done is problematic, and it doesn't bode well for the future. We know that the Biden administration was flouting a lot of these things and kind of trying to go around different laws and so on and so forth. And it seems like Trump is following in that tradition, just doing it in the areas where he seemed to think that he can disregard the judicial branch.
Yeah, I'll go to you, Jonathan. I'll just clarify a little bit when it comes to sort of the reasoning that Trump administration is using. In the case of Mahmoud Khalil, it was, I think, the biggest part is the sort of the curse of the mixed economy. The fact that there is such a thing as visa, there is such a thing as green card, allows for government to very easily sort of just get rid of it with much different standards. When it comes to if it was, let's say, if it was a citizen, then you need sort of an actual conviction. You cannot just simply deport someone or even put someone in jail without the due process, without some sort of basically some sort of conviction. which is the thing I find the most problematic in this case. That in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, the government is not even alleging that there was is sort of not even suing for a crime. It's just using the reasoning that basically it has the ability to revoke in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, it's the green card, not visa, that makes it much easier, and there's a much lower standard for government to do. But Jonathan, what do you make of the whole
Daniel,
situation?
it makes me want to go back and revisit some of the writing about Ayn Rand's perspective on communists in America during the House, analysis on un-American HVAC, UAC committee hearings, coming up going to be 100 years ago. And as I recall, in effect, there was a difference between someone being necessarily sympathetic to communists or the Communist Party and those actively working on behalf of the Communist Party. Perhaps someone in our chat can help refresh some of our memories. Hamas still has 5 American hostages. And I wonder, what would this look like if I believe the government acted as a government should, which would be to declare war on Hamas. Now you've got everyone saying, we want nothing to do with professors who have any associations with Hamas. You treat terrorists like terrorists, not little appeasement scenarios and prisoner swaps, but you declare war on them and you destroy them tooth to toe. You just completely annihilate them from the world. So, I think the fact that we've failed to do that, we've kept them in this kind of, they're a legitimate force. Well, they hold Americans against their will, but we don't really declare war on them. So deporting a professor, I guess, is a good idea, but I think it's going to make her and others look like martyrs for their young students. They had the right ideas. But big old mean Trump, tore them out. I think there needs to be some education here, and declaring war on an organization that has taken American hostages, I think would be a great idea and a great start.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the case of the gang members, the specific act that Trump was invoking was the Alien Enemies Act, which is an act from like 1789 or something. Now, this has been, with America, even those old acts can be used. And those have been used even in the past, in sort of like even relatively recent past, but always during war, always as a sort of measure. This is a sort of a unique instance. We have some evidence and we are going to use it. And that's the sort of this sort of like trying to do things quickly, where I don't think there is sort of any urgency when it comes to this. Not to mention, maybe we need to do a full episode on the sort of gang members. But again, sending them to El Salvador, which is very problematic, the way they deal with prisoners, and I don't think any sort of due process is sort of afforded to them. I think when it comes to any of this, one thing you also mentioned is the sort of the free speech aspects. So when it comes to sort of the pro-terrorist speech, if you are a citizen, basically you can actually advocate in favor of sort of terrorist organization. The only difference is if you are sort of basically colluding with them in some way. If you are cooperating what to say, if you sort of work with them, have any communication with them, then that is sort of like a subject to some action. But again, that needs to be proven in the court of law. And that's what I found the most problematic when it comes to any of this. All of this is happening fast. It's happening without us, in many cases, knowing the full facts. Even that's what's problematic, even I think in the Mahmoud Khalil case, is the fact that we don't know the Trump administration is still not saying what exactly he is actually, what is the evidence that even if we might believe, even if we might have the sort of reasonable case to be made against him, the fact is that the government is not making that case. And once that starts happening, we are, going on a much more slippery slope. And there's anything, I want to go to some of the things she herself has said just to cover that. But anything you want to add? Or Jonathan?
Well, I think what you mentioned initially, that a lot of this is a result of the mixed economy that we live in, and here in the US, the lack of a rational immigration policy being one example of that. So if we had a predictable system of immigration and where we allowed in enough people so that you didn't have this pressure and this constant change of approach depending on who is in Congress and in the White House, a lot of this would probably be avoided, right? And I don't know where we would end up with people who are in the country but not yet citizens in terms of what level of free speech would they have, what level of what would they not have that a citizen have in these areas? And speaking for myself, being an immigrant, during the years I had a green card, I kept a pretty low profile. Not that I felt that I was at risk or anything, but it was the smart thing to do. And you'd think that this professor and Khalil as well, he had a green card or has a green card, I believe, and she's here on a work or a student, some kind of visa.
The teacher is her on H-1B visa. Yeah.
H-1B visa. Yeah, exactly. Just from a matter of self-preservation, if you have the ambition to stay in this country, be a little bit careful. Now, I'm not saying that what they did is a reason for deportation, but I'm just saying that when you're not a full-fledged citizen of the country, be somewhat on your guard.
And may I jump in, Dan? We are able to bring you as the Ayn Rand Center UK brand new material every day that's inspired by Ayn Rand's objectivism. We're all students just like you, and we've got 60 people watching now from all over the world, and we're only able to do this because of support. 5, 10, 15 pounds every month, either on our website or on the super chat. And I see Akira and the Light Life and so many others. I wanted to respond to the Light Life's comment. Now, he or she is a YouTube member. That's only like 6 pounds a month. So take this opportunity to become like a Light Life, because you're more likely to have your comments mentioned and recognized. We thank all of our supporters at every level. But the Light Life says that American students are so distracted, in a few years, they will not remember her name. Highly doubt they care now. And they're talking about this professor who has been essentially pulled away from her job and to be deported from the country. And I have to say, I completely agree. I disagree. This is exactly what lionizes and glorifies people like David Hogg, who you remember was one of the young men who was involved in a school shooting. He became kind of an anti guy to speak out about this. Greta is another example. She becomes this mythical voice. Sean King is someone in the kind of the racial world that becomes part of the story. So no, I think that on some level they want the perp walk. Just like Daryl Hannah wants the perp walk of being walked away from the chemical plant, so that she's really something. What can better, give any Islamist more authenticity than being marched out of an American school under Donald J. Trump?
Yeah, if I may, I kind of agree with you, Jonathan, but I also think that in the medium to long term, if you are championing the wrong ideas, it will backfire on you. I think we see it with Greta, for instance. She's more and more becoming a laughing stock. I mean, while she kept in her lane and focused on environmentalism, people may have taken her a little bit more seriously, but her venturing out into the Israel-Palestine, Middle East space, that has totally killed her reputation, I believe. So it's a mixed bag. And I also want to make a comment related to what you said about supporting the show here. Don't take the fact that I'm saying that you should keep a low profile if you're a visa holder or a green card holder. Don't take that as an argument for not contributing to the show. This is a safe space. So this is spend your money wisely, spend them on the Ayn Rand Center UK.
Now I want to push back against some of the things people are saying in the chat. But first, because Anders, you mentioned about what would be the state of sort of non-citizens when it comes to free speech. So I think even in the past Supreme Court cases, the First Amendment applies to non-citizens as well as citizens, and that is sort of the thing that works. The problematic part is that the fact is that this is not even what is discussed right now, because when it comes to revoking visas or revoking green cards, there is a sort of the what I say is like a national security or a sort of foreign policy aspect, that when American foreign policy is sort of threatened, there is a case for deportation. Now that's a very vague and very sort of I think that can be sort of argued much more easily, and that's what's again makes this the most problematic. Some people in the chat say you don't have a right to stay in the US. American government has no business sort of fighting the right to association when it comes to citizens. If Jonathan wants to invite me into his house, the US government has no business. So, well, if maybe he doesn't, but if Jonathan wants to invite me to dinner somewhere, maybe it's not for the US government to sort of decide if he can do that or he cannot do that. That's simply not in purview. Now they can stop me if I was a terrorist, if I carried some sort of a disease, or if there was like a really basic list. They cannot deny there should be no sort of visas, there should be no green cards, there should not be anything in that regard. And because there is, it makes it much easier and makes it much more problematic for cases like this, because I think there is a ground for deportation with many of the people, but it should be first, it should always be a conviction. Any sort of even non-residents have a or non-citizens have a right to due process, and any sort of thing should be taken in the court of law. And then if they are convicted, we can decide, okay, maybe they've been here for a while, they just go to prison, or they are from a different country, they can take them back. We will not deal with them.
I guess I wish my hope is that we see more super chats like Gail's. Thank you very much, Gail. But my hope would always be that those who espouse these ideas would become complete pariahs. It would become completely outcast, wouldn't get prestigious commissions, and wouldn't get taxpayer funded anything. And just their ideas would be so distasteful to the population that they would have no audience. There would be no audience for their anti-Jew, anti-American, anti-Western perspective. Unlike, for example, in Germany, and I'm not an expert on this, so forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, but as I understand it, symbols of the Holocaust or symbols of Nazi Germany are illegal. Speech about Germany, Nazi Germany is illegal in Germany. I wouldn't want that in America. So I don't want speech made illegal, but I want this woman's speech to be so seen as so irreprehensible that the best she can get is a fucking soapbox in the park on a rainy Sunday afternoon.
Now, to sort of go to what has happened. So again, the reasoning for her deportation was the fact that she had sympathetic pictures, or this is what the State Department is alleging, that she had sympathetic pictures of Hezbollah figures. Hezbollah is a designated U.S. Terrorist organization, and that that she was at the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah. Now, the way she was talking about it is she was there from a religious perspective, basically saying that she respects him as a religious leader, as a sort of like a Shia sort of priest, and that he's very moral and he has very basically like moral teachings. So that is sort of like the reasoning that has been used. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, a judge tried to block it, and then either miscommunication or sort of.
It seems like a real flimsy, you can't really connect. It doesn't sound like they have any means to connect her to violence or planning for violence against America or Americans or Jews of the West at all. So Daniel, what I'm hearing you say is you think you're certainly not unhappy to see her deported, but you're worried about the due process and the way in which it's happening in a supposedly free society.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to even association with the terrorist organization, might be even like a ground for an actual like trial, let alone deportation, where the sort of the bar is much lower. So when it comes to sort of legally, can Trump do that? Can Trump administration do that? We talked with James Valiant about this, and in many cases, the fact might be that yeah, he might be within his reason. Now again, once a judge tries to block it and he does that in spite of the fact, that's almost like a constitutional crisis. Like, what do you do at this point when like an executive sort of is trying to overrule sort of like a block by a judge? So yeah, I think even when I talk about this, in many cases, I think these people, there might be a case for deportation, but all of this should really be done through courts. I think even non-residents do. Maybe, in the case of war, maybe you can make the case for sort of, something, something quicker, something that might require sort of something more rash that again was used in the past. But the fact is, we are not at war with any of these organizations. In many cases, because we refuse to acknowledge that we are at war. And if we are at war, first and foremost, we should go and destroy those organizations before they can sort of like send their people over here. We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, Jonathan speaks rightly. In a better, more rational cultures, these problems would solve themselves. As such, vicious professors would be shunned. Yeah, as I said on the yesterday's episode, when it comes to sort of any neo-Nazi, I hope they starve to death. That basically nobody would even want to associate with them to that extent that basically nobody would even sell them bread. And yeah, basically.
And I have to say, I have some experience with this. It's not a perfect analogy, but I happen to go to Northwestern University here in the Midwest of Chicago. And in the 70s, a guy by the name of Arthur Butts became a tenured engineering professor. And then 2 years later, right after he received tenure, he published an anti-Semitic book claiming that the Holocaust was a hoax. And although, as I understand it, they couldn't get rid of him, he was completely shunned by students. He was shunned by other professors. He was shunned by the faculty. And, he was not accepted as part of the university community. So I appreciate Robert's comment, and I think that's more of what we need is reason, rationality, and the non-sanction of truly evil, vicious cultures.
So some people are trying to say she was denied entry. She was already like a resident of the United States, or she was like living in the United States. And again, when it comes to this, prove it in the court of law. I think there are bad laws on the books, and when someone starts enforcing more strongly those bad laws, it shouldn't be necessarily something that should be applauded. We should want something better. Again, and this is the case for, because I think there is a case for deportation of many people, but when you do it improperly, that would deny it from deporting the actual people we need to, or the amount of people we need to. So even when it comes to sort of even when the sort of the goals are noble or whatever, the process needs to happen still. There is the I'm trying to remember, but I cannot now. Yeah, Anders, anything to sort of add on this? I want to go to some of the things PBS has published, but anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I agree. As I mentioned initially, I think the flouting of the due process here is the most ominous part. Because, as you say, there may be cases where deportation is okay. It doesn't sound like this professor. I mean, I don't know to what extent attending a funeral for a designated terrorist organization constitute reason for deportation. But that again is something for the courts to sort out. And the problem here is that we don't have objective law in this area because of the lack of immigration policy and such. So if the rules were laid down, we would rarely run into these situations. Yes, there would always be edge cases that would have to be clarified, but the vast majority of them, especially in these three cases, I think would be sorted out and laid down, and then when people know what the rules are, you know, they would, they can act accordingly. So if you are a student here in the US, and whether that should be on a visa or however, there will always be an immigration, a permanent resident status, whether you call it a green card or something else, for people who have been admitted into the country, but who not yet are citizens. And for them, you know, that I mean, they would all benefit from the fact that the rules are clear, and today they are definitely not clear. For instance, we have many Iranian immigrants in this country. Some are citizens, some are not, who travel regularly back to Iran to visit relatives. I mean, how should they act now? You know, does it mean that because we're not at war with Iran, but I think the Republican Guard is a designated terrorist organization. So if someone is traveling back and they happen to have an uncle who is in the Republican Guard, I mean, do they fall in the same category now as this professor who attended the funeral of Nasrallah? You know, that's part of the problem here, that we don't have objective law that people can follow.
Now, again, some people are trying to say that she was denied entry and there is a different standard. Again,
I think she was denied re-entry. They when she came back into Boston Logan, they detained her.
well, since this is sort of a new story, I think there are sort of differences, and I don't know how much differences there are. My understanding is that she was sort of allowed to go in, and then she went through the sort of deportation process, which that deportation process was then sort of barred by a judge, but it still went through. Again, this didn't happen in like few hours. This happened over a weekend. Like she came in on Thursday and she was deported over the weekend. So. I mean, you might make the case that, you know, maybe she was just denied entry. The fact is that she was still a resident, and there is still, I think, due process that should be guaranteed. Some people say that non-citizens do not have the same due process guarantees. Well, the Supreme Court disagrees with you. Non-citizens do have the right to due process. They do have the right to many of the sort of constitutional protections. Now, there are differences when it comes to sort of coming into the US, but I think even that is sort of like a bit problematic. So again, I think this case should be followed more, and sort of the first thing we should want is justice. First thing we should want is sort of for this to happen. Now, sort of, Jonathan?
Yeah, and I'll just say, I mean, you know, the schools, American universities, the best ones are filled with terrible teachers, terrible, awful men and women with, you know, very anti-American, anti-Jewish, pro-Islamist ideas. And, you know, there's going to be, just as, in my opinion, there's been a multi-decade effort to instill them. There's going to have to be a multi-decade effort to withdraw them. But my sense is that it's going to be done by changing the way that higher education is funded in the U.S., not by necessarily going in there with a group of guns in effect and pulling somebody out of their chair. You know, we need less government funding of this. We need more private education on every level, and we need the right ideas to take place. And I have some hope, you know, with there's some private universities popping up now, Van Dam Academy. There's, you know, there's lots of new initiatives in education. So I have some hope that maybe better ideas, more reason is on its way.
Yeah, and
Now,
I second that, and especially when it comes to the financing of higher education, there is an area where the current administration, with the help of Congress, could do some real good. For instance, I mean, in the two areas, I mean, you have all the funding of government science funding that goes to universities. I don't argue for cutting it off Doge style, but have an organized plan for tapering it down to zero eventually. But maybe that's over a period of 10 years. I don't know. And the second part is, and the same thing applies there, is for federal student loans. and a lot of these students are on loan. That's another area where the government should get out of education, of financing of education. And to Jonathan's point, if student loans would transfer to the private finance sector, because there would be a market for student loans, for degrees where there is a return on investment. But then we would see a lot more rationality entering education. And, a lot of these students who today are out doing campus protest and who live off of grants and student loans, they wouldn't even get anything in the first place. So
the Light Life, thank you for being a YouTube member, Daniel, if I may. The Light Life has an interesting comment. He or she mentions, non-citizens must respect the host country. The standard is simple, and Department of Homeland Security has published info on expected behavior for residents. It's funny because I'll mention, I remember talking to my own grandmother whose parents emigrated from Poland or Hungary. The line kept going back and forth. They wanted nothing more than to assimilate into being Americans. They didn't want to hold on to the old ways from Europe when they came over. They wanted to act American and speak English. And there was this interest in prior immigrants in assimilating into American culture, not holding on to the bizarre, tribal elements from which they came.
Now again, when it says Department of Homeland Security has published info on expected behavior for residents, now again, we are talking about either green card holders or in this case, H-1B visa holders. When it comes to the discretion of at which they can be revoked, it is something along the lines, if the if the foreign policy or if the sort of American foreign interest is threatened, that is sort of the grounds for revocation or deportation. Now, if I go to the United States and I start talking about how we need to help Ukraine and how we need to stop appeasing Putin, will I be deported because of that? Since that goes apparently against the current interest of the Trump administration. So again, the fact is that this is not something that is clear, and we need bigger standards. Again, we are not in the case of war. There is, I think, there is maybe some legal grounds since they are doing it like this, but it is getting challenged, and we should see where this goes before again, this goes further, because again, that can be used against us once you allow the government to basically say, that pretty much can bar the entry from to the U.S. for arbitrary reasons. Then
right, like it makes me worry. For example, let's say the American government went way right wing, and all of a sudden anyone who was advocating for abortion, well, that would be tantamount to murder. So, well, then we've got to deport them. We've got to snatch down on that speech. So, the government's not supposed to be in the speech business unless people are advocating for harm. They're criminating harm against others, physical harm. So, this is a tricky wicket to cross, but certainly one in which I think Ms. Rand's perspective is even more viable and radical.
yeah, and even when it comes to sort of because it's so tricky, that's what makes it problematic about someone like Trump being the one sort of going through this. Because if James Valiant or Mark Peregrino were in office and they were doing this, I would have a bit more understanding that they do have the sort of they care about the law, and they if they are doing something that you could trust it a bit more. But when it comes to sort of Trump's actions, the fact is that everything until now has been, in spite of the law, has been trying to sort of really go against the the constitutional order with January 6th, the constitutional order of the republic itself. So again, the biggest problem is the person who is doing it and the way this is being done, because something can be right. Maybe there is a case for her deportation. And I think in the Mahmoud Khalil's case, even a bigger case for deportation, but it should be proved in a court of law and then should be deported afterwards, or maybe just go in jail. Again, once someone stays here for a long time, and maybe they are not citizens yet, but once someone has been in the United States for a while, they should just go to jail. You shouldn't like send them back to whatever hellhole they came from.
Well, Bonnie asks, was she pro-terrorist because she went to the funeral? Very possibly, but there needs to be proof, especially because she denies it. And Bonnie, thank you for being a YouTube member and a frequent super chatter as well.
Yeah, so that is sort of what the State Department is alleging right now, that she had pictures of Hezbollah members, or sort of, I think the wording that was used was something along the lines of like supporting pictures of prominent Hezbollah members, and the fact that she said she was at Hassan Nasrallah's funeral, which again, Hezbollah terrorist organization, Hassan Nasrallah, a long-time terrorist. If if you think that that is sort of enough to sort of stop someone from coming into the United States, you might make a case for this. I mean, again, the bar is much lower when it comes to the entry than when it comes to or even the revocation of visa, than when it comes to sort of if she was an actual citizen. Those two things are much different from the sort of legal perspective. But yeah,
Well, and
Jonathan.
certainly you wouldn't want her working at your university, right? I mean, that's kind of where it gets to it, right? I mean, whether or not she's deported or not for these ideas or even attending the funeral, like, do you want her working at your university? Do you want her standing up in front of students? That's what.
At Brown, they apparently do. So.
Well, we can talk a little bit about Brown a bit. Someone says, why should taxpayers pay for their stay in jail? If somebody is in the United States for like 15 years, that's also their taxpayers, because immigrants also pay taxes, and usually pay much more taxes, and usually don't get the benefits of those taxes, since they usually came in when they were already older, so they didn't get any sort of benefits in the early age. And if they are illegal, they will not get any social security and any sort of those benefits either. So that's why I think at some point, if somebody is in the United States for a long time, even if they are not citizens, I think deportation is like akin to I think it's almost like unusual punishment, especially if it's like a really bad country.
But
again,
again,
that's
that's just another instance. I mean, what types of incarceration or not should you have? But that's also part of a rational immigration policy. You would have the rules laid down so that people knew, that, and I'm sure there would be scenarios where, where it's okay, where the right thing to do is to deport someone, and then there are other scenarios where you incarcerate someone domestically. But the problem today is that this is all in flux because nobody wants to take responsibility for implementing a rational immigration policy.
Well,
now,
I'll say too, a lot of parents don't want to take any responsibility for vetting the schools to which they send their children. I don't have children myself, but I have a lot of friends who now have kids who are going to schools, and I hear from a lot of them about, what the protests were like there and how students, Jewish and otherwise, feel on these particular campuses. So, as much as those billionaire activists are talking about, defunding some of these big prestigious universities, I'd love to see that as well. Let's not give these anti-Semitic, anti-Western professors a platform anywhere. Give them a soapbox at best. That's what they deserve.
But I think, Jonathan, we're seeing a little bit of a movement against whether more people, I think, are voting with their feet. So, for instance, there are a lot of schools in other parts of the US that are benefiting from this because people don't find that an investment in an Ivy League education is worth it any longer, right? So now there are still plenty of people who want to go to Ivy League, but I think many of the good universities in the South, for instance, have attracted a lot of students in recent years, and those numbers are going up. So, for instance, at Clemson, I think Bradley Thompson, well-known objectivist, has noticed that they have a lot more inflow of a lot more students who are basically staying away from the fancy school in the Northeast.
Now, so sort of going to the university she teaches at, the Brown University. Well, Brown University was actually one of the first ones who basically caved in to the demands of their students for divestment during the campus intifada. Again, that was students taking over universities, basically occupying them illegally. They had no cases for it, and then Brown University negotiating with, I mean, you could say akin to terrorism, that basically they, I mean, obviously exaggerating a bit, but basically people violating the rights of the university, and then they negotiate with those protesters about, well, since you violated our property rights, let's negotiate what can we give you to stop violating our property rights, and in that. The Brown president, Christina Paxson, has said that students, basically, this was last year, they have agreed to end their protest and clear their camp by 5 p.m. local time and refrain from further actions that would violate Brown's conduct code through the end of the academic year. So basically, they did something that broke the academic conduct, and then they were rewarded with it by discussions about divestment. And that is another thing that makes me sort of really worried about the West and America, maybe specifically, is that when universities, when we as the people refuse to actually sort of do what needs to be done. I mean, all of those students probably should have been just either reprimanded or maybe even kicked out of the university. Once you allow this behavior to happen, once you say this is an okay behavior and we will negotiate and we will give you rewards for this, that what fills me even with much more worry is the fact that once sort of society becomes moral bankrupt, once we refuse to or sort of refuse to do something about this and are tolerant of such behaviors, then no amount of laws, no amount of like government action will save us from that when the people themselves become sort of so basically giving up on the Western culture. Jonathan, what do you make of the? This was a story from the last year, but I think it's good to talk about it as it's Brown University.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, as you know, and Anders, as I worked on a book about Americanism, based on a series of questions that Miss Rand first posed in the early 1940s. She said, what is Americanism? What's it all about? And I still recommend the book highly, and it kind of goes to the heart of those fundamentals. And so often on the channel, we hear people on, well, what about this issue of bombing civilians, or what about this issue of oil or using the environment, whatever like that. And in Miss Rand's perspective was not only just uh, kind of light years ahead of its time, it was so clear, easy to understand, rational, logical, and moral. So I'm happy for the chat we have with our super chatters, especially all over the world, Robert, Bronx, Guy, Gunn, Hilliard, to talk about these issues and bring hopefully some perspective from Ayn Rand to them as well.
We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, keep the conversation going. If people think rationally about the issues and are inspired to read more of Ayn Rand's works, then we have a chance. And yeah, I absolutely recommend sort of reading Ayn Rand, starting with most likely the virtue of selfishness, or maybe even philosophy, who needs it, to basically understand why even philosophy is required to analyze these issues. Anders, anything to say on the Brown University and basically they're caving in to pressure from the students and basically acknowledging that boycotting Israel is sort of a moral behavior.
Yeah, it's obviously morally reprehensible, right? But we are where we are, and but this is just another argument for a total separation of state and higher education, right? Because we're continuing to pump in millions and millions of dollars into Brown's. I'm sure they have a pretty substantial research. Government-funded research, whatever it is that they're doing. And it would actually be interesting to follow the money in the case of this professor who was just deported, what So she was working, I think I saw somewhere that she's a nephrologist or something, working in the areas of kidneys. How did she get her in the first place? How is her research funded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a significant amount of government money involved here. Now, if the university on its own, using its endowment, et cetera, wants to recruit people from the Middle East to join their medical faculty, I mean, in a free market, that's their right, assuming that the people can come in into the country under a rational immigration policy. But the universities, they would be a lot more sensitive to the market forces if there was no government funding involved in this, either in the form of funding their research or in the form of providing student aid to their student body.
Well, I have to also mention, Danny, these young students who are so eager to get their universities to divest from Israel. Israel, as we've pointed out, it is the one modern, rights-respecting, advanced civilization in the entire swath of the Middle East. And their stock market is up about 25% in just the last year. So, their morality of, well, we have to divest of all these Israeli investments, they lost a lot of money doing that. And it's not because Israel conquers its neighbors or steals their natural resources, but because all these incredible inventions in banking and finance and medicine and technology, all this stuff isn't created in Israel. It is truly a first world country in the midst of a third world cesspool. And so congratulations, I guess, on the Brown students who got their university to divest from very strongly performing investments.
No, again,
but again, it's important to point out that a university who is independent of the government in any way, shape, or form, they have the right to do this. They have the right to listen to their students, as reprehensible as we may think it is, and it's wrong to do it, but they have the right to do it. But in the marketplace of ideas, absent government involvement, you will see a swifter reaction from the public, and eventually that will help pull the culture in the right direction. And others will learn from those mistakes, and think twice before they do the same thing, before they cave into the students. They will put better rules in place, what students can do in terms of demonstrating and not, and so on and so forth. We've seen that at some other universities. For instance, Ben Sass, who is the dean of the university, is it either Florida State or University of Florida system, very early on, after the October 7th atrocities, put in some really clear rules about what was and what wasn't allowed. And there were some students who flouted those rules, and they were expelled for 4 years, I believe, or something, which means that they wouldn't come back, right? And it has been quiet, and you haven't heard a word from the University of Florida campuses since then. So it's imminently doable if just the will is there. And the universities who don't, in the free marketplace of ideas, they will lose out in the long run.
Yeah, just to finish on the sort of the Brown University, I think what is really scary about that is the fact that sort of they acknowledge the students broke their rules and refuse to actually enforce them. And I think that's what's problematic. Now, again, not a case for government to sort of do something about it, because it is at the end of the day sort of like a private institution, or I assume Brown University is a private institution, but this should still be criticized when that does happen. Now, someone says universities need to lose their dependency on foreign students and stuff. I don't know. This sounds almost racist more than anything else. The fact is that America doesn't have enough professionals. That's why H-1B visas were created, is because the fact is that America doesn't have enough people, and also America should want the best people from every single nation to come into America and to assimilate and to become part of America. We should try to take the best within all the nations, because the best people might be born in a random country, and America should be the shining beacon on the hill that allows anybody to come in, as long as they are willing to work and they are willing to some extent accept Western values and willing to assimilate. With that, Jonathan, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
Sure. Daniel, the book, again, is a new textbook of Americanism. Just give you a quick, better look at it. It's available at Amazon. Miss Rand's ideas. This is something you can read. It's a great gift for a college kid or somebody just starting out. And what is this? What makes this country and what makes the West important? What makes it special? What makes it moral? What makes it right? It's in this book, and it's at Amazon. A new textbook of Americanism, The Politics of Ayn Rand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Anders, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so as soon as you've finished a new textbook on Americanism, pick up a copy of Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right. You can find that at Amazon as well at a very favorable price. And you can also find me at Substack, andersingemarsson.substack.com. I actually wrote a couple of articles a while back about an immigration marketplace, which I'm advocating. So if you search immigration marketplace on my Substack, you can read about that. And that might be something for a future episode as well, Daniel.
Just to wrap up, someone says government funded is hardly private. Until they stop getting billions from government, they have to follow government standards. I don't think we should ever argue for more government intervention. It should always be for less. So if your problem is that they are government funded, the answer should always be government should stop funding it, not government should enforce some standards that are tied to the money. I think that if we accept that other thing, we'll always move towards more authoritarianism. We'll always move towards more statism. We need to always argue against that. With that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective and The Reality Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you.